Well, it is 1 o'clock. We are very happy to have everyone joining us today virtually for our communications and digital engagement workshop, formerly known as the NRG Oncology Social Media Workshop. So you'll notice the name change just to make it more inclusive of everything that we discuss at this virtual meeting. So this meeting is chaired by myself, Kristen Higgins. I'm a radiation oncologist and chief clinical officer at City of Hope Atlanta, and by my colleague, Dr. Miriam Knoll. Dr. Knoll, are you? I think Dr. Knoll is on. Dr. Knoll is also a radiation oncologist in the Northwell Health System. So we have a great lineup of speakers today. I am going to go ahead and kick us off with an update on the PI toolkit. So let me just pull up my slides. As I'm pulling up my slides, I do want to remind everybody that you can claim CME credit for this workshop. You get an hour of CME, so there will be an email to all of the attendings at the end of the NRG Oncology meeting on how to go ahead and claim the CME. So don't forget to do that. All right. So as I said, this is the PI toolkit update. So the PI toolkit is a tool that the Protocol Operations Monitoring Committee developed several years ago. And why did we do this? We did this because this committee felt like we really needed to be more intentional about the way that we tracked accrual for our clinical trials that take so much time and so much person power to get open. And we really weren't doing much in regards to making sure that they were enrolling. So the purpose of this POM committee was to follow studies for accrual after they were activated and to propose solutions that can increase or expedite accrual. So in January of 2019, this committee created the PI toolkit, and PI stands for Principal Investigator. And what is this toolkit? I'll take you through all of the components of it, but it's basically a recipe to create engagement around a clinical trial as it is activating and throughout the lifespan of the clinical trial to really get it out there and get patients accrued as quickly as possible. We developed the PI toolkit and we piloted it with NRG Oncology LU005. We presented the work to one of the NCI committees, the NCTN Act committee in June of 2020. And then we kind of took a step back and took inventory over all of the NRG Oncology clinical trials to understand how many trials were using elements from the toolkit. And that was about 36. And then a few years later, in February 2022, we decided to implement the toolkit across all of our NRG clinical trials as they were coming online and activating. And we also published a paper on this work in September of 2022 in JMIR Cancer. And again, the whole purpose of the toolkit was to empower the chairs of our trials to really go after the clinical trial accrual. And to make it something that we're engaged with and really using all the tools out there to get all of the oncologic community engaged with the clinical trial. And so here is kind of the meat of what the PI toolkit is. So you can see it's composed of several different tools. The first one is a study overview slide set that is created by NRG Oncology headquarters with the PI input. This lives on the CTSU website, is important to just educate people about the nuts and bolts of the trial. The second component is a patient brochure that's created by the protocol development team and also lives on the CTSU website that really is a very plain English, patient-friendly way to present the trial so that patients can take it and share it with their caregivers and things like that. That's a little bit less, I would say, easier to read than a consent form, for example. The third component is a personalized letter to site investigators that comes from the PI and that talks about the importance of the trial and asking people if they would come along and open the trial at their site. And this piece is actually, I think, one of the biggest helper in terms of all of these tools, because it really engages individuals to go ahead and open the trial at their site. We also use our NRG Oncology newsletter to put little blurbs in about the trials as they activate. And then, of course, we use social media tools. And what does that look like? So we have our study PI and co-PIs make posts about the trial at different important milestones, activation, first patient enrolled, all sorts of different little times that the PI or the study team can come in and raise awareness about the trial. For example, a lung cancer trial, Lung Cancer Awareness Month, we really post a lot about our trials during these months where there's special reasons for increased engagement across the board. We also have created study landing pages for patients. Again, you can give the patient a website so they can go and read about the trial with their family members. Additionally, we have webinars at activation that, again, provide another way for investigators to learn about the study that are led by the PI, so that investigators can ask those questions in real time and get answers back. We monitor the studies monthly with CTSU reports. That's an important component of the toolkit, so we can track how the accrual is going. The PI then, of course, is giving study updates at our semi-annual meetings and at other important oncologic meetings. And then one of the, I think, important components of the toolkit is a trial in progress abstract. And traditionally, the NCTCN hasn't really done trials in progress abstracts about their studies. It's been a lot of industry partners putting forth these abstracts at ASCO and things like that. But it's a really great opportunity for us to get our work out there, especially for the PIs that have put in all this work into developing a trial, and then they can have an abstract at ASCO or ASTRO or a smaller disease-specific meeting. So that has been, I think, a great help. And then we also have been making patient videos about their participation if a patient is so inclined. So these are sort of all the tools in the toolkit that we are engaging investigators around as our new trials are activating. And so I want to just take you through some of those examples of the tools in the toolkit. So this is NRG LU005. We engaged a patient advocate who is a small cell lung cancer survivor. I made a video and it was put on YouTube about this study, and our patient advocate is tweeting about it to her circle of lung cancer survivors, trying to get it out there and raise awareness about the study, tagging other patient advocates and other patient support groups around small cell lung cancer. This is another example of a news story that was written about a veteran that participated in the study to get a patient's perspective, which I think is really important. It's great to have other patients read about somebody else's experience, and it really, I think, hits home for people as they're going through the disease and considering a clinical trial. And then here is another tweet from NRG Oncology focusing on one of the webinars that was a kickoff for NRG HN014. So just another example of using webinars to bring people together to learn about our new trials as they are activating. And here is an investigator presenting her work at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Conference in 2024. This is a trial in progress poster for BR008. So we're really trying to get all of our investigators to put these abstracts together and present them at disease-specific meetings or ASTRO and ASCO. And that's been a great help. We also, at our semi-annual meeting, will have many times a videographer on site, and we can create videos of the PIs talking about the trial sort of in different natural ways with questions that we pose them. What is the importance of the study? How does it fit into the greater oncologic landscape of the disease? Why should a patient consider this study? Those are all different questions that we're asking our PIs, and using a videography to get sound bites of the PIs and then putting them on social media. As you can imagine, not all of our investigators are active in social media, and that's okay. Everybody has their own preferences. But in this case, Dr. Chuck Simone is the PI of NRG LU008, and we made a great video about him talking about the trial at the summer meeting, and here we are posting about it and the importance of the study and the important questions that the study is trying to answer. So just another example of the toolkit in action. And so this is just a snapshot of our PI toolkit and sort of what it looked like in 2020 versus now in 2024. So in 2020, we took kind of an inventory of our active trials. We had 36 active studies that had at least one of the toolkit items in use. And you can see what most of those toolkit items were: patient brochures, training slides, social media cards, study flyer, newsletter, and webinars. And then we, again, have really rolled out the toolkit to all of our studies, and now we have 46 active studies and 28 studies that are using the full PI toolkit. So you can see here, like our trials in progress abstracts have gone up substantially. We didn't have any in 2020, and now we have 37 over the last 4 years. We're making patient videos, patient landing pages. These webinars are becoming very, very common. It's a great way just to engage the investigators around the study so people keep it top of mind, because really that is so much of what is involved in enrolling a patient on a study, is just making sure that as you're seeing those patients, you're thinking about what trials are open and what trials they could enroll to. So this is, I think, just a good slide to show that we really have incorporated the toolkit into the trials that are opening and made progress there. So in conclusion, I think the toolkit is a good example of how we can use these communications tools, and they can be widely implemented into phase 3 trials. We've done this within NRG Oncology. It's been a relatively painless process. It's also not expensive. It is essentially something that can be done on a low budget, and it's something that really anybody could do for a trial that they're opening. You could do it for an investigator-initiated trial, a cooperative group trial, industry trials. It's something that I think is broadly applicable. And then I think lastly, I just want to bring home the point that as clinical researchers, we need to use all these tools available to us to spread knowledge about the work that we do, so that we can reach more patients, more family members, and ultimately have more success when it comes to curing cancer. So those are my slides, and we can probably do questions at the end if that works for everybody. I'm just going to stop sharing, and I will pass it to Dr. Knoll to go ahead and introduce our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Higgins, that was amazing. It's really incredible to see how useful and the growth of the toolkit has been over the last couple of years. So kudos to you and the whole NRG team. So I'm really excited today to introduce two physicians that, yes, I met through social media, through digital tools, to share a little bit about their story, utilizing digital tools, and also to inspire more collaboration with, NRG physicians and all physicians with international physicians as a sort of case study of what's possible. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eli Sapir, who is an Israeli board certified radiation oncologist who did his training in Israel and also completed a fellowship at University of Michigan. And he is chair of the Radiation Oncology Institute at Asuta Ashdod University Hospital and chairman of the Israeli National Radiation Oncology Group. And after his remarks, we'll also hear from Dr. Orit Gutfeld, who is chair of radiation oncology at Tel Aviv Medical Center. So with that, I will hand it off to Dr. Sapir.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Knoll, and thank you so much for inviting us to join this distinguished workshop and to present our experience in organizing an international ISTRO meeting. Just hold a second, I'll share the presentation I prepared for this meeting. So here it goes. I'll start by describing the event itself. It was held on October 13th and 14th at Tel Aviv Sourasky Medical Center. The event hosted over 300 prominent specialists from Israel and the USA. And these are just a few examples of who exactly were there. Among those, we had Dr. Zalewski, Dr. Wipiwala, Dr. Hugh, Dr. Hafti, Dr. Ennis, Dr. Sher, and many others. From the Israeli side, we had Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Ben David, Dr. Kedar Parson, and many others. The organizing committee included Dr. Gutfeld, my co-chair fellow. She's a radiation oncologist and the chair of the Tel Aviv Sourasky MC Radiation Oncology Department. And of course, Dr. Knoll, who is also the co-chair of this session. This was a high-notch scientific meeting, and along with the clinicians, we had a scientific program which included physicists, RTTs, industry leaders. We also organized an educational contouring session for our residents, and Dr. Hugh and Dr. Sher were personally engaged in this workshop. Our primary goal was to establish a yearly meeting as a platform for innovation, collaboration, and education through building bridges between the Israeli and USA radiation oncology communities, with hopes to expand this collaboration to European and Middle East societies as well. And the original intent was to organize an in-person meeting. However, due to the circumstances you are all aware of, some of the participants were forced to give their talks virtually. How did all started? Well, in the past, our Israel Radiation Oncology group were used to hold meetings up to twice a year, sometimes more. Every meeting was dedicated to one or two distinct topics, and several dozens of Israeli participants were attending these meetings. And occasionally we had distinguished guests coming from abroad as well. And we already started to plan this type of meeting in the beginning of 2024. And then I came across to the series of posts in one of the commonly used the digital platforms, the WhatsApp application. There was a very exciting and tempting proposal on March 31st in 2024 in this WhatsApp community of the Jewish radiation oncologists by someone I didn't know her well by then. And this is, of course, Dr. Knoll. She proposed to bring the docs to speak in Israel at one of the meetings, at one of the national meetings. Once I saw these messages, it immediately ringed a bell in my mind, and I responded to her privately and proposed her to organize a joint meeting, and her response was very short. Yes, let's do that. So this is exactly how it started. And we set the date of the potential meeting, October 13th. And as you can see, we had no much time to run the logistics. The venue was generously proposed by Dr. Gutfeld at one of the most beautiful Tel Aviv auditories. But to ensure a success of this meeting at such a short notice, we had to work very intensely. And here the digital platforms came in hand. WhatsApp application allowed us to engage in personal invitations and played an important role in group communications for attendees. The X social platform allowed to run hashtag campaigns and real-time interactions. We also used LinkedIn for professional outreach and updates and created centralized platforms for registration and live Q&A. Following all this, I think that the key goals were achieved: to amplify visibility and ensure robust attendee participation. We created a rich and some will say a very busy scientific program which ensured a very diverse participation of the leading experts from Israel and the USA. It started at 8:30 a.m. and finished at 7 p.m. and I'll let the photos to speak for themselves. So these are the attendees. Among those, of course, you see Dr. Knoll. and myself and many others. These are the participants. The auditory was quite crowded. As to our next meeting, so here's the teaser. It is set to happen on December 18th. Within the next few weeks, we intend to announce the official save the date, and the audience of this workshop are more than welcome to join us in this exciting journey. In the meanwhile, enjoy this ChatGPT created STD. So this is how it goes. And thank you so much for your attention. And again, thank you for inviting me to join this workshop.
Dr. Grothfeld?
So thank you for the organizers for inviting me. It was really amazing. I mean, the process from the idea that was, sent over WhatsApp to its, becoming a true event. I must admit that at first I found it hard to believe. I wasn't, it was a good idea. It sounded very appealing, but I thought I was really doubtful about its possibility. But it was quite amazing, the speed of things, how actually Mimi, Dr. Knoll and Dr. Sapir were the driving forces behind this. And I think it was mostly WhatsApp for me. I'm kind of old school and I use mostly WhatsApp. I'm not linked to the other platforms. I choose not to, and for various reasons. But the speed of things, the way everybody connected to the idea and did whatever it was needed to do was pretty amazing, and it did happen, and it was very exciting to see people coming from various places, various backgrounds, people coming from abroad too, at this not very very difficult times indeed. And it was very exciting to see, and it was really serious scientific event with valuable educational sessions, and it brought people together. And I think that the fact that we can connect so easily really contributed to that. But still, with all these platforms, there needs to be, a person or a few people with the initiative and the will to work for the goals they set for themselves. And we must use this platform wisely. And this was a very good example to make a good use of this platform. And I think the medical community should really, while we try to use these platforms for good goals and for clinical research and clinical trials, we must also be aware of the downsides and the amount of misinformation that these platforms bring to so many people. And we have to think how we face that too. This is something that many times really worries me. We hear that from patients all the time. We have to deal with misinformation, and sometimes sometimes this information is motivated by we have to see how we face this amount of misinformation and disinformation on these platforms. So I don't have much to add. Thank you.
I think to your point, you know, the fact is that, and we've discussed this together so much also, you know, the tools are out there and people are using them, right? So it's not something that we can ignore, both from the physician perspective in terms of dealing with our patients, and then also alternatively, you know, what we've learned, which is, you know, supporting each other and helping each other, collaboration, you know. So how do we use these tools to help the oncology community and not just sort of, you know, say we wish it didn't exist, which we probably all, if we voted, would say our patients would be better off without, right? Perhaps.
So not necessarily.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Right, right. So
yes. Sometimes what we deal with quite often is, you know, when new medications or new technologies are being advertised in some way in an irresponsible way, and people just think that this is the next thing, and they come and they just demand to be treated, for example, with proton beam, or, you know, they have been advertising the Unity, so every patient thinks that they should be treated with MR-guided LINAC, and you have to, you know, explain that this is not the right thing for you, or not necessarily the best thing for you. And this is only one example in our field, but, you know, when immunotherapy came out about a decade ago, and they had these headlines of the new answer for cancer is solved, and then everyone came to your clinic and demanded to be treated with pembrolizumab, for example. So this is, you know, people use this platform for so many reasons, and some of them are not for the best interest of the patients. They have had other motivations or incentives or interests. So, but it's not, this issue is not limited to medicine or to medical issues. It's actually, it has implications in every aspect of our lives, and we cannot ignore it. I mean, it's there, it's out there. People are not going to stop using those platforms, but we have to deal with it, and we have to use it in a wise and a proper way. And I think Easter was an excellent example of how you can use it to build something that is, you know, that is very constructive.
Great. Thank you so much. That was an excellent summary and takeaway, and I'm sure we'll open it up to questions for the audience as soon as we finish our last speaker. So I just want to introduce our last speaker, who is Dr. Lauren Henke. Dr. Henke is an associate professor at Case Western. She specializes in the treatment of GI cancers, and she and Dr. Stephen Chung have been leading the NRG Oncology podcast. Many of you remember that this podcast launched at the semi-annual NRG Oncology meeting in July. And they are going to give an update about the content, the cadence of the podcast, our speakers, all sorts of different things. And it's, I think, been a great initiative, and we've really had a lot of great feedback about it. So thank you, Dr. Henke, for speaking today. Thank you, Dr. Chung, for all of your efforts in getting this podcast going.
Thanks so much for having us on and letting us share an update. Stephen was actually able to make it on today too, so he'll probably jump in with me here. But we wanted to first and foremost, recognize and thank ACRO, the American College of Radiation Oncology, actually just awarded us a social media award for this year's annual meeting in March. For the whole team, really, we have to, I think Stephen and I hugely acknowledge our collaborators within NRG, within the communications committee, gurus like Angie, who does all of the editing of our podcast episodes. It makes us sound smooth like NPR every time. Of the two of us, Stephen is gifted with a baseline NPR voice, and I'm not so much, but they make everybody sound excellent. So we're really proud of the whole team and the recognition of that with this award. Moving into some updates on the podcast. So, I think it's important to reflect on always what our goals are with this NRG Oncology podcast, which is first and foremost to really highlight the ongoing endeavors within NRG. This podcast has its origins within the Protocol Operations Management Committee, which is tasked with monitoring trial accrual. So we're always keeping mindful of how can we better highlight ongoing or upcoming trials. But we also wanted to take the opportunity to shed light on multiple members and sectors within NRG so that our listeners learn more about the organization as a whole, its structures, how to get involved, and really to try to help support NRG Oncology to move its endeavors forward. So when we take new podcast episodes on, we're always prioritizing them within this goal structure. So, of course, clinical trials, we often try to highlight those that maybe are having some accrual challenges or maybe likely to have some accrual challenges as they get underway, so that we can highlight and support in tandem with things like the PI toolkit that Kristen so nicely highlighted. We do also try to coordinate announcements with scientific meetings like big publications or trials from NRG that are presented at ASTRO and ASCO and other annual meetings. We, of course, take direct suggestions from different groups and leadership within NRG, and we do our best to be inclusive, not only across member representation, but also even in multidisciplinary representation, knowing that both Stephen and I are radiation oncologists. We try not to only feature radiation oncologists and carry our biases too far forward. So when we look at podcast listens, on the whole, we've had trending upward listenership as podcasts have been released. I think a really, really popular podcast episode was none other than Dr. Higgins and Dr. Yam, which was a tandem release of the podcast on the same day as the Astro Plenary, highlighting both major head and neck and lung cancer trial that were released on that same day. So trying to work for synergistic approaches in both of our aims in terms of highlighting NRG, but also synergy with our guests on each episode. We also try to coordinate with awareness months and different events that may be going on in the annual calendar to better time our podcast and to take advantage of that energy. So in terms of followers and subscribers, we have a good representation across groups, although, we may think of our Spotify or Apple podcasts, for those who are common users. We actually have quite a bit of YouTube listenership as well. In terms of podcast consumption, so this is how much of an episode that people tend to listen to, our consumption tends to be a little bit better on the classic listening platforms, if you will, the Apple and Spotify podcast. Where on YouTube, where perhaps people are a bit more accustomed to watching a video, we primarily right now are audio only. So our consumption or the duration of the podcast episode that people listen to is a little bit lower on YouTube. We may consider trying to include some visual or video elements in the future. That's not something that we've quite yet mastered. It's a little harder to edit video than it is to edit audio for both us and our guests, but potentially something that we'll work towards. And on the whole, we've got a good number of subscribers and listeners across these different platforms. And then in terms of recorded podcasts in the pipeline, we actually have a backlog right now of about 7 months of material, which is a great problem to have. You can see here the different episodes that have been recorded with a variety of different guests that we are working on getting scheduled or that may be scheduled. We are also considering, and I think planning to move towards, instead of a monthly cadence, an every 2 weeks cadence of podcast release, which will help us, I think, not only develop additional listenership and subscribers, hopefully, by having a bit more regular content, but also to be able to show off all of these different elements of NRG. You can see everything from the demographic initiatives, patient advocacy, new committees like the Theranostics Committee with Dr. Michalski, of course, plenty of trial-related episodes, episode featuring healthcare disparities, you name it. We are willing to dedicate a podcast episode to it if it makes sense to the guest and makes sense to NRG. Stephen and I laugh that I think the one podcast episode request that we've declined so far was actually a request from an ECOG Akron investigator to highlight one of their studies, which is, flattering, but not necessarily within our NRG mission quite yet. But nonetheless, we're really happy to take on a wide variety of topic range. Other planned recordings that are coming up, we'll be highlighting the Samurai trial with Bill Hall, are working to try to get some NRG GI-006 and GI-003 podcasts lined up, patient-reported outcomes, astro advocacy. One that we're excited about and that we're partway into is a Big Dog, Little Dog episode featuring the challenges of cancer centers, both on a smaller scale, like the University of Hawaii, and then also challenges faced by larger programs as well. So these are things to look forward to that we're excited to highlight. So just to summarize our progress to date, we've steadily grown our listenership. Our consumption is pretty strong, but always something to improve on. We're very happy and proud of our team for this social media award highlighting this effort. We are the first podcast for an NCI cooperative group, so that's really exciting to be recognized in this way. Trial-related episodes, especially those that are related to recently resulted trials, seem to generate the most interest. But we have lots of content ideas coming up and hoping to continue that kind of collaborative coordination with big meeting releases, which seems to have been a success. But we're always happy to take requests, and we really, I think, a big thing that we need always is engagement from our colleagues and social media champions. As we highlight things like a surgical trial or a medical oncology topic, building engagement within those larger communities to amplify this message outside of the followers of, let's say, Stephen and I alone is something that we're hoping to build upon. So if you have ideas or requests, send them our way. If you know interesting or famous people that would want to be on the podcast, send them our way by all means. But overall, I think we're really pleased with how this is going so far and looking forward to seeing it continue to grow.
Thank you, Lauren. That was a fabulous update. I love the logo and your smiling faces right there. Great. So that concludes our speakers. We'd like to just open it up for any questions regarding any of the presentations, any of the speakers. I would like to ask just a very practical question to Doctors Henke and Chung. How do you guys find the time to work this into your day, recording the podcast and things like that? Because it's a lot of extra work. Like, do you set aside like a certain time of the week where you do the podcast recordings, or how are you able to get it all done with all of your other work duties?
It's always a balance, I think, as with anything. I'll just say that Stephen, I think, is a natural as it comes to helping set scripts. I give him full credit there. He does actually, I think, the majority of the scripting of these, although we look at it together, that is something he's just really skillful at. Making the time, just finding windows. The episodes themselves are not that challenging to record, but it does take a 30 to 60 minute window, and just finding those windows, coordinating, relying on admin assistance. I will say that it sometimes is unique where you record these. Luckily, they're audio only right now, so I have recorded an episode in my car in an airport parking garage on the way to a flight. But anywhere where you can find somewhere quiet, that's the beauty of using digital platforms, is that you can really accomplish this engagement from anywhere. Of course, if we transition to video, I might have to get a little bit more snazzy than bootleg Wi-Fi in my car, but it just goes to show that this is something that is accessible, that is doable, and doesn't require a professional recording studio to accomplish. Stephen?
Yeah, we tend to just coincidentally have the same administrative days, so that helps too. We actually didn't adjust our admin days. We just happened to have the same admin days when we set out to do this, and we've also made it a point to be flexible. We've even recorded things on weekends, like Sue Yam. We were actually going to record her podcast on HN005 during the week, but then she basically lost her voice, and we said, hey, whenever you're better, and it turned out, hey, Saturday at 5 p.m. and we did it.
Dedication.
So we're flexible.
Awesome. We have a question from Dr. Julian, who's the chair of the NRG Oncology Communications Committee. His question to the speakers is, what challenges does social media have today? I think Dr. Gutfeld hit on many of them. Disinformation and, the challenges with, reading a headline and assuming that it applies to you as a patient can be really difficult. But curious to see what others think. Dr. Noel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with, what Dr. Gutfeld had, shared about in terms of, patient information and, expectations and anxiety and, resources, and sort of how do you explain, why we make the decisions that we do. And, you don't want to tell a patient, well, it's too expensive, because they don't care if it's too expensive. They just want the best, right? But I would say from the physician's perspective, similar to your question, Dr. Higgins, to Dr. Henke and Dr. Chen in terms of finding the time, I think sometimes social media can feel overwhelming and can feel like another task and another job, something that we need to do. And it certainly takes so much of our time, not just professionally, but just personally. So I think the challenge is really to, like with so much else in our busy lives, to be intentional about why we're doing what we're doing, why we're engaging with social media, what we're looking to get out of it, and then how to do that in the best way. And when people ask me, should I be on social media? How do I get involved with social media? I think the question is why? What are you looking to get out there into the world? Who are you looking to engage with, and why? And if you're in a million WhatsApp groups and some of them are a total waste of your time, archive them or lock it, So yeah, it's an amazing tool. These tools are very useful. You can accomplish amazing things, as we've seen here today. But yes, do we all spend too much time on WhatsApp? Yes, we all spend too much time listening to, podcasts and, not your podcast, right? So I would choose yours over one that's a total waste of time. So I think that sense of agency and a decision about why you're doing what you're doing, I think is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity.
Yeah, those are really good pieces of wisdom from Dr. Noel, a social media expert.
I have a question. May I? Do you use the AI for incorporation in social media to ensure the facilitation of engagement with the people around through these platforms? and how? If yes, this is one question. And another question to Dr. Henke. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, yours and Dr. Chen as well. And I'm one of those 500 on average who listens to every each of those. How to ensure the visibility of your podcast? Eventually our radiation oncology community is much huger than it is, I think that many other radiation oncologists and not only radiation oncologists could benefit for listening to the contents you are broadcasting. Thank you.
I'll say one thing, in response to that. Dr. Henke forced me to get a Twitter account. So, and I've been slowly learning how to post and repost stuff.
I think that I would say there is I think a huge audience that we have the potential to reach. Whether or not, people will engage on the same level that you do. I'm delighted to hear you listen to every podcast. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for supporting us. Even casual listeners, may only listen to a podcast here or there, but how do we continue to have this be visible to our current listeners and additional listeners? I would say that's something that Stephen and I are learning as we go, and happy to learn from those who have experience. Right now, we've mostly been leveraging existing tools, both in terms of, NRG newsletters, the NRG social media account, amplifying these posts, making sure that these podcasts are available on widely used platforms. But the most of our, I would say, marketing tends to just be through things like Twitter. We would love to grow that. I think a challenge that we have, like I mentioned, is we're both radiation oncologists. So we have a pretty radiation oncology heavy network on our own personal social medias, and trying to get our guests, when they're from other specialties, to amplify the message on their own accounts or tag their specialty groups so that it can reach that wider audience, is something that we're still working on. Dr. Knoll mentioned trying to be intentional about tweeting or posting or engaging. That's something that I have to keep in mind. I'm not somebody who really naturally is using social media, at least not tweeting outwardly myself every day. I might look at Twitter, but I have to think about, hey, I need to remember to do this, and just taking the time to do that extra retweet or extra quote tweet. That on its own can have an impact, but we're open to suggestions and always looking for ways to grow that audience. So if you or anybody else has suggestions for us, we welcome them.
I'm wondering if Dr. Sapir, Dr. Goodfeld, if you can also comment on what advice do you have to other oncologists or healthcare professionals that are looking to engage with international physicians in Israel or elsewhere, just as, something that you've, done yourself, hosted a successful conference with international speakers and attendees. Is it just the idea? Is it that utilizing social media? Is there something else? And what advice would you be able to share?
Ellie, would you like to comment on that? Because you made the...
So from my perspective, I think that when you have an idea you want to spread the rumor about on social media or any other way, you need, first of all, to be passionate about it, and you want to be very consistent in your efforts to achieve the goals you are facing. And you must set the goals you want to achieve. Once the goals are set and you start working hard with it, you find the friends and it goes viral. And that's all about it. When we started to work with it, the three of us, Mimi, you, Orit, and I, It all sounded that it could be hardly achieved, especially now when we have such a terrible time in Israel. But again, eventually it did work. People wanted to come, and they came. And those who didn't, they were so sorry about it, and they are planning to do it in the end of this year. Most of those. Hopefully, until then, the peace will be here in our region for everyone, and we all pray for it.
If I may add, I think that to some point at the end, it boils down to personal connections. Both Ellie and I had fellowships at the University of Michigan, and we had personal friends, I may say, and it was reaching out to those people, and they had their suggestions, and it was like a chain. And eventually it worked out more than we had expected, or at the beginning we thought that it wouldn't work at all because of the situation here, but it was really amazing to see that people were willing to help and share their knowledge and experience and collaborate. But at the end, it was personal connections that worked out. So I think that even in this era of social media, there's nothing like real world personal relationship. I mean, that's this is the way I see things. So it does help. The communication is so fast and it's so easy. But at the end, you have to know people and, keep your relationships and work on them.
I think Dr. Sapir posed the question, has anybody used AI at all in social media? I personally have not. Has anybody else? Dr. Knoll, Dr. Henke?
I have not used it for posts, and we actually have not used it for scripts. Stephen and I have joked about it a couple of times, trying to use AI to help us generate questions to ask our guests. But quite honestly, Stephen just seems to come up with great content questions on his own and doesn't need AI, and sounds even better. So I think, AI can be a useful tool in many realms. And you could easily see where, something like a podcast script might be helped or assisted by it. But I think it's something to use cautiously for things like that too, because it can sound very quickly very disingenuous and artificial as it is, and not have the same depth or the same character. It's really an average on some level of existing content that is out there on the internet that's getting worked into these models and not necessarily generating things that are new and unique. And I think really we hope to have new and unique and newly valuable content that we're putting out there too. So I think it's a tool that can be leveraged, but hopefully not something that we're using to create everything that we do.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the more noise there's out there, which AI is certainly contributing to, it's more sophisticated noise, but it's still a lot of noise. I think the more that the human voice, whether it's through a podcast, whether it's through a one-on-one communication, in-person engagement, these are things that are going to become more and more valuable, because I think there's an abundance of data, there's an abundance of information that's being shared, and ultimately what people are looking for is really that human voice, that human connection. So I think all these ways, all these tools, ultimately you want to get down to the bottom, which is that connection. So I consider Dr. Higgins a close friend. I get to see you, in person once a year, but the rest of the time it's digital engagement, right? But there's still that human connection, right? Ultimately, at one. And that's why I think, conferences, like there was a dip in conference engagement because everybody was like, well, I can just participate in a conference on Zoom. It's not the same. And that's why people are going back to conferences in person, right? So you're never going to lose the in-person engagement. The tools are there to augment and to help it throughout times where you don't have it. Like letter writing, right? People used to write letters and that's how you stayed in touch. And then you'd get together for a fortnight, right? Because when you were there, you were going to savor it. You were going to spend a full 2 weeks with whoever it was that you wanted to spend time with. So I think it's just that intentionality. And again, the bottom line is it has to be connected and tethered by real human interaction. Let's see, someone else had a question here. Dr. Julian was asking about posting clinical trial results once presented. Yes, certainly. I mean, tweeting is a great way to share all information. So that certainly definitely can be useful. What are your thoughts, Dr. Higgins?
No, I think a lot of people like to stay up to date and really rely on those real-time tweets from conferences about new data. So I think that that's a great way just to get content out there fast, especially, in our fields with the way that, the pace of drug development and things like that. It's really helpful to digest information quickly when conference attendees and investigators are sharing those results in real time. So I'm a huge fan of that. I very much enjoy that. I think it's also nice when you get real time kind of digestion of the data and people's opinions on it, because it's just good to get those conversations going and hearing kind of, both sides of the coin, if data is controversial or things like that. So I really enjoy that aspect of social media. So I don't see it necessarily going anywhere. And I mean, it's mainly based on X right now, but other platforms are great, Instagram and things like that. Those are more where we find our patients, not as much professional groups. But LinkedIn also is, I think, gaining popularity as a replacement for X as people kind of potentially shift away from that platform a little bit. Well, I want to thank everybody for their engagement with this hour. I want to very much thank our speakers, especially Dr. Sapir and Dr. Gutfeld, who are coming from many miles away and into their evening hours. So thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you, Dr. Hinkie and Dr. Chung, for your enormous contributions with the podcast. And thank you to my co-host, Dr. Knoll, and of course, all of the behind the scenes support that we have with Michelle Shepard and Angie Peer and the whole NRG Oncology staff. This conference is recorded and will be online probably within the next few days. In case colleagues or friends might want to view it, just point them to the NRG Oncology website. And then also just remember, you can claim CME for this as well. So there'll be an email about how to do that as the NRG Oncology meeting wraps up next week. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Beautiful day. Bye-bye.